Welcome to the Imposter Syndrome Club. My name is Jessamy G. I am joined, as always, by my beautiful co-host, Miss Alice Edie. Hi, Alice.
Hello, Jess. Hello from Melbourne.
So we are, because we're tech geniuses, across 3 time zones today, as we are joined by our gorgeous, stunning, amazing guest, Miss Gillian Goertz. Welcome, Gillian.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So where are you in the world at the moment, Gillian?
I'm in Southern Alberta, Canada.
Southern
So,
Alberta, Canada.
Yeah, I'm the Mountain Standard Time, and you, I think, are in Pacific Standard Time, and I don't have a clue where Alice is. I don't know what the name of your time zone is.
No, it's neither do I. This is you're our most exotic guest today, Gillian. This is happening in real time.
That is true. She is very exotic and very wonderful. And Gillian, you know how we start this podcast is by asking our guests to read their own bio. So we're going to jump straight in with the exotic, beautiful Gillian Goertz. Would you indulge us with your bio, please?
This is such a cruel thing to do. I just need to say that to you, and it's good on you for doing it.
Thanks.
It's the emotional professional hot ones where it's just like, oh, get you sweating right away. Okay, let's see here. Okay, I'm gonna read. I've got the medium one and the longer one. I'll go the longer one. Let's really get the torture going. Okay,
do it.
Yeah. Gillian Goertz, that's me, is an award-winning author, cartoonist, graphic recorder, and illustrator. Her work, that's me, has been seen in The Walrus, The Globe and Mail, and her clients include Audi, Volkswagen, UNICEF, and more. Her first kids' graphic novel, Shirley and Jamila Save Their Summer, published by Dial, was praised by the New York Times Review of Books, spent 7 weeks on the Canadian bestseller list, and was included in the Best Books of the Year lists in the New York Times the New York Public Library, CBC Books, and more. The sequel, Shirley and Jamila's Big Fall, recently won the Doug Wright Award for Exceptional Canadian Comics for Kids. Gillian has a passion for communication and sharing ideas and stories through multiple mediums, and you can see more of her work at jilliang.com.
I did notice you sped up significantly towards the end.
It's long. It's long. This is like the beefy, I have a professional gig and need to seem like I'm qualified to do things one. You know, you need one of those.
You know what? It's actually not long. Yeah, totally. This is one of those things we spoke. I can't remember who we spoke about it with recently, but so you and I, Gillian, have known each other for years. We'll edit that out. Fine. And I can't remember who it was, but it's like, you know, when you've been friends with someone and you know that they're brilliant and accomplished and amazing, but you haven't, like, why would you read their professional bio? And so I was just looking at your website before we jumped on today. I'm like, holy shit, this is a fucking accomplished woman. The New York Times, excuse me.
Don't mind if I do. I'll take it.
Yeah.
It's funny. I've got a real sweet pal here in Lethbridge, which is the city I'm in, that I've overheard her talking about me to other people, and she keeps calling me a New York Times bestseller, which I'm not. But it's like, how do you tell somebody who's like such a reliable hype person that their info's wrong? So I'm just kind of like, I guess we let that lay and let people be more impressed, but it's a lie. It's weird.
If it's not you doing the lying, if it's a truth out of the mouth of the person saying it, then I feel like there's some wiggle room in there.
I don't think it's my responsibility to disavow. And also, it's like a bit of a like, actually, I wasn't like, I don't know. It's like oddly awkward to try and bring that up. But anyway.
Well, you are a bestseller, though, not a New York Times bestseller. And you were reviewed by the New York Times. So I feel like, you know, it's close enough.
It's close enough. It's close enough. But it's the Canadian tendency to undermine any Canadian recognition and only value American recognition. It's like, it's sort of the like, I mean, I don't know if this is an identical parallel, but I feel like Canada is to New Zealand as US is to Australia, where it's like, this is sort of like the like, you know, podunk little sister who lives nearby and the weather's worse. And like the celebs don't really pop off in the same way unless they leave, and that whole thing. Like there's some of that energy where Canadians are not that interested in bigging up our own people until they've been validated by the big brother down south.
That's super interesting. And I think Canadians and Australians probably have a fairly similar kind of mindset in terms of this kind of tall poppy syndrome, or you would never talk yourself up, so it's why it's good to have your hype gal, even if her details may be slightly wrong, because it's so frowned upon to do that for yourself. Like, as you said, I'm in LA at the moment. We're staying right behind Venice Beach, like Muscle Beach. And it's like, there is no one with a fucking problem about hyping themselves up in this place, which is one of the reasons why I love it so much. Have you always lived in Canada? Have you spent any time living in the States?
No, I've never lived in the States. I've traveled down there a bit. And like, I think part of the reason that, I wonder if that's true. Part of the reason I feel like I even was reviewed in the New York Times is because my publisher's American. The way that I got the book deal was by going to a writing conference in LA. And it was like the best, most magical experience. And I met all these amazing people and I got to speed pitch agents there. And I already had the idea for the first book, but I hadn't done anything yet with it. It was just sort of like, this thing. And I got some Canadian grant money to do it. So I knew I had to do it, but didn't know anything about publishing. Kind of spontaneously went to this writing thing, made some of the best friends of my life, got an agent, like had it all kind of just start rolling forward. It was pretty remarkable, but it was like, there's something about that American energy that's like, they're looking to get things done in a way. There's like a shamelessness.
Yeah.
That sort of sits outside of the ultra polite, the colonies. There's like that British stank on, Australia is a British colony, so's Canada. And there's sort of like, how they say, there's that joke about the great British love story is two people fall in love with one another, never tell each other and die. It's like, you withhold. There's that like, if we never are earnest and never speak our minds and hearts, that's better because it's a little more polite and it's not that embarrassing, messy human feeling stuff. And America doesn't have that. It's like, here's our reality shows. There's some boobs. There's maybe a wiener if depending on the show. And like, we're all going to make out with each other and kind of humiliate ourselves in this way. But like, I don't know, that energy is there of just like, sell yourself. I'm out here doing the American dream. Look at me. That I don't think Canada has.
Do you think it's a little bit like that? And I think that this exists specifically for women, but like that tension with confidence, where it's this thing that we all want, but then are in a way socialized to punish in that sense that like, it's like if someone, especially a woman, is like overconfident, that is kind of like a big no. But America is that girl. America's just the hot. It's just like, yeah, I'm hot, and everyone's like, no, you can't say that.
Yeah. So you agree? You think you're pretty?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like, ha. Do you were you ever tempted to make a move down there, like when that publishing deal was happening and when you kind of like experienced that different momentum? Was there ever a point like career wise that you were like, maybe I should move to the big smoke,
the biggest smoke,
try my luck?
I mean, yeah, potentially. I think like coincidence and kind of maybe turned that path around, because the trajectory of my whole thing was that I got the book deal, started working on it, and both my books were published during lockdown, essentially. So like the possibility of doing any of that stuff kind of was off the table. Like you couldn't travel, you couldn't do anything. I couldn't have a launch party, that kind of stuff just got like yanked away. So, I mean, potentially I wouldn't be against working in the States periodically if the opportunity arose. But I mean, now the States is so scary. I'm not that far. I'm like 2 hours from the US border here. So it's like people kind of bop down to Montana on a regular basis, but like once you cross the border, things are different. Like, obviously this is Montana too, and not like New York, LA, that are sort of the cosmopolitan centers, but like suddenly trucks have eagles on them holding guns with American flags, and that's like the decal over the back window. Like that's real. So I know the energy of the States is a little bit scary, and it's quite difficult to go and work down there as a Canadian. There's a lot of hoop jumping you got to do to get there.
Yeah, right. It's interesting though, like talking about this. So well, it was a conference or something that you went to in LA that kind of sparked off these connections with your publisher. But it feels like that exact thing we're talking about, that is like a more of a US mindset thing of going out and selling yourself, feels like you're actually quite good at that.
I think I am kind of good at it.
Yeah.
I'm not, I worked in sales a bunch, and that's a pretty useful thing to have. It's, a lot of creatives go straight into a creative field, and I sort of like whittled my 20s away working a lot of different jobs that didn't have anything to do with drawing or illustrating or making art or writing or anything like that. And at the time I was like, oh, I'm wasting my prime, blah, blah, blah. But I think it was actually super invaluable, because I worked, in retail sales. I worked in advertising sales. I worked as a copywriter for a while. I worked in marketing. I had like weird admin jobs, all kinds of weird stuff that now it's like, oh, I know how to make a filing system for my own personal business because I worked as an administrator. I know how to do sales because I had to cold call at this newspaper, and I had to like go knock on doors and be funny and be charming and try and get people on side with me in all these different ways. So I don't know. I think it's kind of a boring adage that it's just like, I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't what I did in my past. And it's like, yeah, that's true no matter what you would have done. But I definitely see the usefulness of everything that I've done. And with the graphic recording work that we all have done and do, like to have any sort of experience with corporate jargon, to have been in an office before, to have like worked any of these kind of corpo jobs is super useful. And it really comes in handy. So I don't know. I think it's hopefully a beacon of hope for the other late bloomers that take a minute to sort of find their career feet. I did not start doing anything I'm doing in my 20s, not even really until my 30s / now 40s.
Could you speak a bit to that change?
Which change?
When you made the shift from kind of, as you said, whittling away your 20s to finding where you are now, to making your art your life as well?
Yeah, absolutely. This is, I guess it was, I have to think of how the timeline works. In 2008, I was living actually here in Lethbridge still, which isn't where I grew up. I grew up in a city called Saskatoon in Saskatchewan, still in Canada. And when I was in my 20s, I moved here to Lethbridge, which is significantly smaller than where I grew up, just to be closer to my family. And I was like, oh, I'll just stay for a year, and then ended up working all these zillion jobs. And I was really kind of burning out in terms of, I was sort of stagnating. I got this great job doing sales for a newspaper and was kind of succeeding at it. And the newspaper was like, hey, we've got a couple people that might retire, and they call it like a desk. They're like, they retire and then someone steps into their desk, aka you inherit all of their clients. And so they're like, this is like $100,000 desk, and if you step into it, you'll just take all those clients and start making like $100,000 a year and like just crushing it and living large. And this was like, again, in 2007, 2008. So like $100,000 was even more then. And the prospect of that is actually what kind of shook me out of wanting to not do it anymore. It was like, I'll get too comfortable. If I start making that kind of living, I'll just like settle into it, and it will never, it's like that, golden handcuffs light. It's like bronze handcuffs. I'll be too comfortable to ever take a chance. So I quit that job, moved to Toronto, went to school, incurred like 20 grand in debt instead, which was sort of stupid. I'm a bit of an anti-art school kid, but it's to each their own. But for me, I think that you can get a lot of those skills and make a lot of those connections without having to go 20, 30, 40, $50,000 into debt. But I did it, and it got me to the city. It put me in the path of all of these people that I wouldn't have met otherwise, and that absolutely were instrumental to me getting where I am today in terms of like making comics more of a job, making illustration a job, even learning about graphic recording and what it was, and being in the path of that kind of work. It's super expensive city to live in, to a degree that is actually stupid and harmful, and is ratcheted up so much in the 13, 15 years that I was there. But it's like the opportunity cost. The reason people do it is that you just run into and incidentally meet people who are actually doing the job you want to do. It's like, I never thought people growing up in a smaller city in the prairies in Canada, I'm like, people aren't really actors for their job. People aren't really artists for their job because you don't see it. But once I lived in Toronto, it's like, oh, my friend's dad is a director that has an Oscar. This friend is a filmmaker that's making films now, not just like making some student grade thing that'll never do anything. It's like they're doing stuff that will do stuff. And just knowing that that's a possibility, I think, is actually kind of instrumental for artists, which is why it's so singularly cruel that big cities have become so expensive. It's critical that like young artists need to be able to be there, live in a rat shack, but like affordable rat shack, and like Scrabble and have like really fun, messy, gross years for like 5 or 7 or 10 years until they get their feet, and then, can live in some place that has hot water reliably,
Yeah, absolutely. There's a school here in LA called New Road School who I'd met some of the staff there at a conference in Melbourne a few years ago, and I've caught up with them since. And it's a charter school, so they've got a combination of all sorts of students there. But like, because of where it's in Santa Monica and because of where it is and the type of parents potentially who'll be there, like they had like Trey Parker's kids go there and like the Edges kids. So their excursions were to like the South Park studios. You know what I mean? It's like having these opportunities to see like shit at that level from that young. It's not like, oh, that's a thing that happens inside the TV that I don't have anything to do with. It's like, oh, this is a legitimate career path that is entirely possible because Joey's dad does it.
This is it. Yeah, it's from such a young age, the bar is high.
Yes.
It's just like, this is stuff doesn't have to look crappy because I've seen whatever. It's like, why, this is sort of the Nepo baby complaint, is that, not only are you have parents with money and success, but you're just like in the path of successful people, and your normal is so much higher than the normal of other people. It's what it is. It's like, of course you're gonna like, sure, you probably inherited some talented genes, etc., but you're also just gonna naturally be good if you can like play with the good stuff and use the good paints and like use the good computer system that has all the sound mixing stuff from like the age of 3.
Yeah.
It's like, if Mozart or whatever was born into a family that didn't have a piano, you wouldn't know if he was a genius or not, like, to put it in a small scale.
You know that saying that like a poor workman blames his tools or whatever, and it's like, yes, but good tools sure do fucking help.
This is it. This is it. Well, and it's like, if you're not hungry, you've got room to make creative work. You know what I mean? Like, if you've got stability in your home, you can make creative work. It's not just the tools. It's also like, where's your head at on a daily basis? Do you have to worry to survive, or can you actually thrive on stuff? Which is why the expensive city thing really gets my goat. But anyway, I have an axe to grind about that.
Could you describe, when you're speaking about moving, when you first discovered this kind of like expanded creative community? I think a lot of people who maybe don't necessarily work directly in the arts, like, here people will always talk about the importance of a creative community or an artistic community, but there's sometimes people don't speak about the link between the two, because also, in a way, right, like, say your craft is drawing, no one is doing that drawing for you. So like, where is it that community comes in? Like, they're not making your hand draw better, but could you kind of just like talk to us a bit about those years, or like, what would it be that you would do with those people or in those spaces that made it so generative for your career? And when I say career, like your mind and your development and like who you would become.
Yeah, I feel like there's a piece of like wanting to impress the cool kids. You know what I mean? If like the funniest kid in your class is actually really, really funny, you're going to like raise the bar. I remember hearing some podcast where Patton Oswalt was like, I always just wanted to hang out with the comedians I always want to hang out with people who are funnier than me. So I'm always striving to make them laugh. If you hang out with people who are less funnier than you, it's really easy to be the king of the castle really quickly, but you're never going to grow. And I think that that's a big piece of community, is that like I moved into a shared studio space in Toronto, gosh, a while ago now, like probably 10 years ago. And like I still have studio space out there that's shared, and a bunch of my crap's out there. But moving into that space was a real sea change, because suddenly it was like even the people in that room weren't necessarily doing the same thing as I was. Like there was conceptual artists and filmmakers and people doing all sorts of stuff. But just to be like, to see people doing it, as we've discussed, but also to have those people in the room to be like, hey, I'm working on something. Can you just be a second set of eyes? And they're like, oh, I like this, but not this. What if you tried that? And like you have the opportunity to invite that into your thing, your world, and to hear that kind of really positive feedback. And you're just influenced by seeing good work, you know? It's like if you grow up in somewhere that doesn't even have an art gallery, you're not going to know what painting can be if that's your medium, whatever the case may be. A friend of mine just did a 3-month residency in New York. And it's just like, that's such a nice critical thing. I mean, she's like a more established artist, but it's nice for young people to travel in that way, to be like, well, yeah, you went to university at, whatever arts university in small city Canada, but like you should go around the world. You need to see masterworks. You need to see different stuff. You need to see the work of different cultures to know what's even available to you, because that influence is so critical. And it's just like, it's normalizing, it's at a certain point when as you grow up, your parents no longer understand your job. And it's like, that can happen in the friend circle too. Like all my high school friends, it's like all of us went in completely different directions. And I couldn't tell you what the day-to-day of any of them looks like anymore, because it's so different. Like one's a lawyer, one's a doctor, some are teachers, like one's an engineer. It's just like, we can't talk shop anymore, which is fine because, the connections hypothetically are more about your interpersonal lives, but it's nice to talk shop with people who understand what the shop is.
That's so true. I am just laughing. I had dinner recently with 2 of my best friends. Like we all used to live together, like love, like family, but we've all gone in very different directions with our careers. And we tried to describe to each other what we thought each other did. And it was like asking like a 5-year-old what their dad does for work. That was, I mean, we were like in the ballpark, but it was like the most basic of basics. So I totally agree, having people around that get like the little like nuances and annoyances and wins and joys, like a lot of people won't understand that, and nor should they, right? Like we also don't understand what it's like to like get a big sale at the bank.
We really don't understand that.
You know what I mean? Banks don't sell things.
Oh, banks are always selling things. They love to sell. I always go to
this
my
is
bank
my understanding.
for my big purchases.
You know what I mean? But yeah, I agree. I think that's super important to have people there to like celebrate and commiserate who get like the work behind it.
So Gillian, can you now sort of shifting to the work you do in comics, which is like you mentioned you'd had some copywriting gigs before, so you're clearly a very comfortable, very confident writer. You're a very funny person. You're very articulate. Not to blow smoke up your butt, but yes, all true. And also, you've also got the skill of drawing, right? So why comics? Like, what is a comic, which is a combination of the two? What are the possibilities and also limitations of that as a media over and above just drawing or just writing?
It's a good question. I think it's a funny thing. I've always kind of thought of myself as the drawer. It's like, I could draw pretty well from a pretty young age. So I got a lot of positive feedback for that. It's like, this is the kid in the class who can draw. And that's sort of a double-edged sword in some ways, because I don't know, I really just was like, yeah, I guess I'm the drawing guy. I gotta grow up and have a drawing job, and if I don't, I'm wasting my potential and all that stuff. And so, you know, hence I had guilt and shame in my 20s from not pursuing the thing and the potential, and don't waste it and blah blah blah. But like also in that time, like I did a lot of, I mean, these were the live journal days. This was early internet, early 2000s. I was just like writing my stupid little blogs, but becoming more comfortable writing, but not thinking of that as a skill that I was developing. It was just like an incidental. So then when it came to, you know, trying to make illustration my job, that's what I went to university for. It just sort of like, the more I went to school, and I went to OCAD University in Toronto, which is fine. I don't have a huge amount of super positive things to say about it, honestly, but mainly because right when I got there, it had just got its university status. So suddenly it was trying to convert from a diploma program that was more of like a hands-on experience where all of your profs are like illustrators that are working in the world, but now they were kind of being forced into academia, and they were all pretty bitter about it. So when I got there, like the energy was cynical. It was just like, oh, somebody wants me to fill out a research grant. They're not academics. They're people who are like doing illustrations on a daily basis. They're doing record color covers. They're doing magazine covers. They're doing like, I don't know, whatever illustrators do. But there's also an element where illustration itself is sort of like this dying thing. It's like the amount that you get for a cover illustration hasn't changed since like the 1901s. You used to be able to be like a celebrity, you know, you get like $1,000, which then was like $100,000. I mean, this is not hard math, obviously, but like, you can't make a living being an editorial illustrator. And that's what the university program seemed to be wanting to teach us how to do. And I found it really annoying that it was just like, why aren't you teaching us career skills? And it's like, well, because these people don't know them either. And this is because they put an academic hat on it. It also becomes more inflexible. It's not as malleable. You can't bring in people. They really were that time, not anymore because the money's there now, but they really like poo-pooed gaming or game art design. And they really like didn't have a huge thing about sequential art, which is, you know, comics with an academic hat on. And so, you know, I got out of that, was working a regular job. And then, but I like, even since I was a little kid, I always wanted to be a cartoonist. And I also thought that was a syndicated weekly newspaper strip, which again, a thing that kind of doesn't exist. It's like all the things I got interested in just kind of like kept dying right when I get up to the counter to like, you know, pay my token and get on board. So I, by coincidence, ended up meeting through a friend, Mariko Tamaki, who's like, if you don't know her work, please drop everything and look it up. She's a writer and she makes comics with her cousin, Gillian Tamaki, no relation, just the same first name. And everything they do wins 1 million awards and people like cry over it. And it's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. It's like elevates the form. I could dream of achieving 50% of that. But I met Mariko and she was a huge mentor to me. She was like, gave me work and let me illustrate smaller pieces that she was working on, and was like, you need to apply for these Canadian grants, et cetera, et cetera. This is a really long path to the question you asked. Really, the essence of what you asked is why comics, which is, I think that without the drawing, I wouldn't have given myself permission to do the writing. But because I knew I could do the drawing, that was already a storytelling medium I was familiar with. So if I just have to write the story, that it makes sense to me. These are my characters. They're drawings I made. I of course I have to make them say something. So I didn't overthink it. And then I let myself do it. Because if I would have overthought it or thought I had to like be a writer in order to do it, I wouldn't have. It seemed too scary. That's like a thing that other people get to do, but not me. Again, the Canadian, like, how can I ever do this? Like simpy weasel face. You know, imagine if I wanted to do something, like just fucking do it. So I did it. But like without Mariko and like forcing me to apply for these grants, I don't know that I would have. And so as a result, I do try and like nag other pals in Canada to apply for similar grants because that money's out there. Go get it.
Yeah, it's a skill to have and to just know, unless you've been involved in that world, Like, how do you know? Like, why do you even think to apply for grants? You
Yeah.
know?
Well, and
Yeah.
it just seems like, I mean, the phrase gatekeeping is whipped around so heavily, but even if there isn't actually a gatekeeper, we gatekeep ourselves from stuff that we've like put on a pedestal. And so the comics thing, for some reason, seemed a little more accessible. I'm like, I've been drawing cartoons since I was a little kid. And I would always draw and write stories for them, but I never thought of it as writing, and I never thought of it as cartooning. I'm like, this is just what I'm doing for myself, for fun, for hours and hours and hours as a tiny child until, you know, whenever teenager done, when you start to like want to be social instead. But yeah, so the whole having an agent and then having somebody to be like, yes, this is actually good and fine, and we're going to take it to a publisher and we think it's good enough for that. I was like, okay, like your funeral, good luck. It's lucky it was as easy as it was, because if it would have been more difficult, I don't think I would have made it over those hurdles, which is like a real privilege thing to say, but like that's how it was. I tried a couple times at these writing conferences, which seemed fun. Didn't seem like, I wasn't like a bushy-tailed kid getting off a bus being like, I got a dream, man. I was just like, I'll go to a conference. It'll be no big deal. It's for writers. That's not me. I'll just go. Yeah. Sorry, you're gonna say something, Jessa.
Yeah, no, I'm super interested with your Shirley and Jamila books around what drove the choice for you to write books. So these are aimed at like middle school age kids, right?
Yeah.
Why that age group?
I've always enjoyed writing for kids more than writing for adults. Like as a young kid, I was a pretty voracious reader and was very like in libraries a lot, given a lot of books to read as a kid, was read aloud to from a very young age, and could read, like was reading myself pretty early. So that was a big thing. I'm an only child, so I also had like a lot of alone time. It's just like, here's a big pile of books, here's a big pile of paper and pens, go be by yourself for a while. And that was not a problem for me. And I don't know, my favorite books and my favorite experience of books is that kind of age group, that kind of like 8 to 12 sweet spot, when you're reading full novels with full characters and full stories. These aren't like primers that are just trying to teach you how to read. They're actual stories about your emotional life as a kid. And those were always the most interesting, and still are. I still read more like kids, YA, middle grade, than I read adult books. And so to make comics, that seemed like I didn't even think about it. I'm like, that's what I'm going to do. It's going to be that. Don't think twice. I also wonder if there's not an element. I come from like, even though I'm not personally religious, I come from a pretty religious family on both sides. And writing for kids means I don't have to like deal with writing about sex or like writing about like sexuality or adulthood in a way that like I know my family wouldn't be chill with. Not my immediate family. My mom's awesome, but like the extended family. Not that we're not even that close, but like it's still in the back of your mind when that's the experience of coming up, that like growing up, that was something that was, we're not talking about that. There's a lot of things that are a sin in the religion that I grew up with. And like, I think being forthright about sex and sexuality is one of them. So it was also a way, I think, to sidestep that, but it also was quite natural.
That is so interesting and makes so much sense. And I suppose as well with that age group, as the author, like you've got that creative control of what you do and don't bring into their world. So yeah, you get to create a place for you to play imaginatively with the elements that you feel good and comfortable playing with, like in public, and creating that kind of space. How do you think about what goes into each book? Like what does the process look like of building that world, and not only the characters but their extended world? Like how do you build that?
Oh man, I mean, I gave myself a few cheats, which was smart, especially for a first book, but like the whole they're getting, I think, further and further away from it, but the idea was that it was just a Sherlock Holmes pastiche. It's like Shirley Bones, Sherlock Holmes, not a coincidence. It's And I was really reading a lot of Sherlock Holmes and loving it, except they're like super racist and super sexist. And it's like, I would like to extract the good bits, like the fun of the mystery solving and like the reveal of like the genius knew it the whole time. And then he's got this friend and like, what's their relationship? And they're, like they sort of have this like friend crush. Are they secret lovers? Who could know? Like, there's just like this intensity of their friendship that's sort of like got a magnetism to it. And I really was like, that would be a fun thing to transpose. And I doodled the Shirley character one day and was like, oh, I know who that is. And I know exactly what she needs, which is more stories. And she needs a Watson and she needs the whole thing. And I was like, well, if I set it in Toronto, where I was living at the time, it's like Toronto's actually a nice London parallel. It's like we've got these two characters living in a big metropolitan city with lots of like wild characters all around, and like, what if they're kids and they're solving like kid-sized mysteries, but the real mystery is like, what's the deal with their friendship? And you sort of like have to like read through the mystery to get it, and the mystery informs it and all that stuff. So like I had Toronto as a place. I had sort of the bare bones of their relationship, that it was going to be this sort of like Sherlock Holmes and Watson thing where they're kind of unlikely friends, but they're brought together by coincidence, and then that coincidence ends up opening up the fact that like actually they both have all these complementary qualities that make them actual friends and good crime mystery solving partners. So that was kind of the big piece of it. And I just like stole neighborhoods. I literally would I'd go and draw in the streets, but I'd also like click down Google Street View to draw backgrounds. It's like, that's a real street. Wow. This is like, yeah, if you walk around in Toronto, you can like hold up the book and find places. Some of them are so cool. But yeah, it's real parks, real cities, real streets, real everything. So I put them on the street I was living at when I started the books. I moved after that a couple times, even within Toronto, but it's like, I'm going to put them in this neighborhood that I know pretty well. There's a big park nearby that they can walk to. There is basketball courts down that street. So I'm going to put those real streets in and the real courts in. And then, kids who are living in Toronto will get like fun Easter eggs, and kids who aren't will actually get to see a real city instead of just an imaginary place.
That is so, I love that so much. I know I'm just like LA, because we've been here for literally like 4 days. So I'm still like, and this other thing about California, but
you're honeymooning.
Yeah, totally. I can see a palm tree and a blue sky right this minute. But reflecting on like, we get so excited, we as in Melburnians, even Australians, but particularly like the city that you grew up in, if you hear you're like a street, a place you've been referenced in a song, or like there's been, only like 1 or 2 TV shows set in Melbourne. You're like, I've been there. There's a tram. That's North Melbourne. I know that building. It's so exciting. And it doesn't detract anything to people listening who don't know those places, right? Like, because it feels like it's letting you in. It's giving the audience some credit that they'll join the dots. Like, they don't need to know exactly what park that is in order to enjoy it. But if you do know what park it is, you get that like extra bit of like, this is like, I'm part of this. This is a real place that I know. It's such a special thing, and the reason that I didn't just bring it up to remind you that I am not in winter and in LA at the moment, but it must be an interesting experience because people growing up here have their shit referenced all the time. Like most of our exported art, movies, songs, whatever that comes from here. That's why we get so excited when we come here, because we're like, oh my God, I heard that street name in a song or whatever. But it must be so different for that to be so normal, to hear the names of places that you grew up in referenced in so many different art forms throughout your whole life.
Totally. Imagine like growing up in New York and then like everything that you watch is just like, well, this is, I literally know all those neighborhoods. That's where I'm from. Well, living in Toronto too is like, it plays New York in a lot of movies because there's like tax credits you can get, like Hollywood can get for filming in Canada. It's always cheaper. It's like so many movies are filmed in Vancouver or like Toronto and area. So it's like, oh, that's Toronto. And you can always tell from like the bike lock posts on sidewalks. And I'm like, that's City of Toronto. You didn't erase all the stuff. I know it. And it's so exciting and fun. Yeah. This is also a fun thing about big cities. I love that.
Yeah, totally.
This is Lethbridge, where I am now, is The Last of Us. Have you guys watched Last of Us? A bunch of it is filmed around here. And like there's shots in Lethbridge, crappy little Lethbridge. Sorry, Lethbridge, I love you. I actually do like Lethbridge, but it's like, it's lil compared to LA, Toronto, whatever. And like it never is in things. And it's like you can see the big high level bridge in a scene, and a bunch of it's in Calgary, and a bunch of it's in Fort McLeod, and all these surrounding towns here is like, get the Southern Alberta vibe from Last of Us. But that's the countryside that I'm in.
I'm just trying to think of like any comparable reference. And as someone who grew up in Johannesburg, I'm like, District 9 is the only one I've got.
Dan's favorite movie, by the way.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that's a rough one.
So I was thinking when you were speaking about you referencing like Google Earth images or like the city that you're in, like I think there's something to the specificity that makes people understand that it has like more of a, not just texture, but like we trust it more. Like that feels real, even if we don't know the original reference. Like I might not know that I'm looking at a Toronto background or Melbourne or LA. Like I might not know the exact context, but I think we're very attuned to picking up the difference between the generic idea of houses in a background or the slight imperfections and like idiosyncrasies that make a thing feel real.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's the weight of research, you know? It's like you can tell if somebody's just like dashed it off of the top of their heads with all of your own like headcanon assumptions, as opposed to like, oh, I researched a bunch of stuff and I learned a bunch of things. And even though I'm not going to read from my research, it like colors what you see and what you put out there, I think, in a big way.
How much of that, like, so when you're sitting down to write a book, like, do you have one of those setups, like kind of a beautiful mind where it's like all the things on the wall and you've got like the red wool connecting them? Like, how do you write a mystery?
It's, I mean, having the Sherlock Holmes books as source material, and because they're older, because they're old, they're not covered by like intellectual copyright or whatever, you can make a version of them without having to like pay money or whatever, you know, like there's a word for that, and I have it, but it's gone. But yeah, I mean, my studio when I was working on it was like, looked like, you know, the red string situation. I had a bunch of reference up on the wall. I need to actually be better at that. Like the more lunatic my wall looks, the better, because I'm not somebody who's going to remember to look through a file, or like that'll be enough of a deterrent. If I have to open a drawer, I'm good probably. I'll just make it up. Like I need things in front of me. My desk is chaos. Like everything from like here to here is a zoo, because I need things in front of me all the time. So yeah, it's a bit, the reference stuff was huge. The world building stuff is huge. In the second book, I like, they like break into a house. It's like good to put some actual felonies in a children's book, I think.
Some light felonies.
Yeah. A little light B&E for the children, but they had to like break into the bully's house, and I'm like, okay, well, I have to design a house from scratch. And so I did it. I like laid out the floor plan, and I'm like, the stairs are going to go here, and they need to be able to like move around in that space. Now, for the next book, I've actually got a sick hack, because my dear friend and local genius, Jane, is really good at using SketchUp. So I'm going to give her a bunch of my floor plans and have her like build me 3D models that I can move around in.
That's a sick idea.
Yeah. And then it's like their like SketchUp is to the millimeter. You can build things from the plans that you make. You put in real measurements. So if she can make me that, like I can actually like get in it and like move around and then take screen grabs from that. And it's going to save me a lot of work from perspective drawing, which is my least favorite thing in the whole wide world. I hate it.
Agreed.
What
sucks.
A brilliant idea. That is, and will that then, Or even just what you've done so far with like drawing the floor plan and imagining the house, even without the incredible 3D experience. Does that influence the story? Like, do you decide on the story and then go, okay, I need to work out like how this works logistically? Or do you think you find once you kind of build the house or create the world that sparks off new ideas for how things might unfold?
It's back and forth, I think.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a real stickler for the details. It bugs me when, like as reading comics as a kid, even like I didn't read a lot of the superhero stuff. It wasn't for me. And B, it made me crazy when they'd switch artists. It's like, I've committed to what these characters look like. And it's like, okay, same characters, new artists. I was like, no, I can't deal with it. So I try to bring that. I mean, I can't help but bring that same kind of pickiness to my own work, which makes it really arduous and bad. But it's like, from a mystery standpoint, I'm like, okay, well, if they did this, why didn't they do this, this, or this? So I need to like throw in a line that covers that. Like, you got to tie up all the loose ends. That can be the tricky part of mystery writing. But I think I'm a person who does crave logic despite being illogical in my own ways. So there's a part of me that wants that. I want there to be the order in the thing. It's like, well, if this went missing here, and it's going to be like they had this much window of time to find it, where would they be? And like, you kind of have to map that stuff out. I mean, I guess that's a little bit of Mind Palace. I reread a lot. I reread my own stuff a lot and make sure it hangs together.
What for you makes a good character, both in terms of writing them to feel real and layered and complex, and as a kind of add-on to that, do you have any kind of tips for other illustrators around like good character design visually as well?
Okay, good question. I mean, in terms of writing them, I feel very strongly about having a bit of like I hope my books have a bit of a restorative justice heart. I don't want anybody to be a true villain. I don't want any good guy to be only good. Like, I really want it to be about the personhood of children on a certain level. Like, my favorite books growing up all had that. Harriet the Spy is really like an apex book for me, and like, I did a comic once about Louise Fitzhugh, the author of it, she's amazing and fascinating. And like, she was a bit of like what's a person who leads the way?
Trailblazer.
Trailblazer, that's the word. Thank you. A trailblazer in kids' books not being like prescriptive morality tales, like Dick and Jane learn etiquette, learn to make a steak for your husband. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of kids' books prior to that were very much about like training you to be good little nuclear family babies. And her book is like, the kids are mad, the kids don't fit gender norms, the kids do all kinds of crazy stuff, and they get mad and they break the rules and they do all this kind of like real life human being stuff, very personhoody. So that's a big thing that I think is critical when you're building characters, is that like, if this person's too concerned about like right and wrong and morality, and they're always going to make the right choice, that's a boring character. It's like, the humanity needs to be there, especially if it's for kids, not just for adults. Like, I want to have flawed characters.
I got goosebumps when you said the personhood of children. I think that's such a powerful like phrase and idea. And yeah.
Thank you. Well, I feel pretty strongly about that. I think that a lot of the ways that kids get exploited too is in the way that they're sort of assumed to just be like half beings, where, like, they just do whatever, or like, I don't care about their wants and needs, or, they're just sort of not listened to, and they're not fully developed human beings. I'm also not an advocate of this, like, asking every little thing. Sometimes you got to tell the kids what to do and give them some structure, but like, I don't know, they're, especially at this age of like 8 to 11 to 12, you're like really out in the world, sponging up everything you're going to learn about what it is to be a person in the world. It's like, what your morals are, or like, what are, like, even just the basics. It's like, I have to start making decisions for myself. I have to start thinking for myself, like, what do I want? Which is something, I think you were a little more lizard brain prior to that age. But yeah, so that's a big piece for me. In terms of the drawing part and the actual like art character design, I have a real pet peeve about characters that look identical in silhouette. It's the Betty and Veronica of it all. Like Betty and Veronica, if you gave them the same hairstyle and colored their hair the same, are the same. They don't look any different. Their eyes are the same shape, their bodies are the same shape. Your characters should look different in silhouette so that you could tell in the dark in front of a, backlit door frame who's who. That's going to make it more interesting, easier to tell your characters apart. Also, like, I don't know. I want a lot of different body types. I want a lot of different body shapes, and the way that you dress and the way that you make choices about your presentation is all like an inroad into that character. I really like, I put Shirley in identical clothes all the time, but I give Jamila different outfits. Like they're subtle, but they're different. Because not because I didn't want to make a million different outfits, but because I think when you're a kid, you do sort of fall back on a certain uniform. It's like, this is like,
or a 38-year-old.
Who could know? What if I had a crop top and some athletic pants? But they're beautiful. Listen, your style kicks ass. I loved me and Jessamy went to a wedding a few years ago, and you were like also crop topping and like palazzo panting at the wedding, and I was just like, nothing but respect for this queen. I loved it. But you're like, this is the wedding version of this, and now this is like the daily version. This is the professional version. I love it.
Well, yeah, thank you.
But the whole thing with Shirley, I think, is that like, I sort of like to think of her in that sort of like ultra religious angle where, like Orthodox, a lot of different Orthodox faiths will wear a uniform, because the typical idea with that is that if you don't have to make that decision, that's one more decision, like, or thought process that you can like be using to like exalt or like to focus on God or focus on your righteous life. Like the less decisions you have to make about stuff that doesn't matter, allows you to focus, say, on mystery solving or like gaining information so that you can, be a better detective, which is, I think, 100% Shirley's focus is logic. So when her parents sort of are like, what if we just dress you like a British schoolgirl in a school uniform? She's like, yep, let's just do more of those. Get me a week's worth of dresses and wash them at the end of the week. I'll wear them every day. Couldn't care less. Whereas Jamila's like, I'm a tomboy. She wants to wear her brother's clothes, wants to be that jock boy thing. And this is what she's allowed to get away with, is all these secondhand clothes. And I think that her family also has less money. So that's also telling you that.
What were you like at that age, like 8 to 11-ish?
I was I had the worst series of the worst haircuts known to man. But which is not actually not represented. I should really, in the next book, make sure that some kid has a terrible, terrible haircut.
I think it is truly like iconic of that age. There's something about hairdressers that like a 12-year-old, 11-year-old sits down just as you're about to become the most self-conscious and awkward and insecure of your life.
Yeah.
And they're like, all right, like, let's make this worse.
So much worse. This is my mom at a certain age, like around this age, was like, you became convinced that I needed to have a lot of volume on top of my head, that my hair was too flat. So cut it all off, and then we permed the stuff on top.
Oh, like, Gillian.
I'm so sorry.
And that lasted for almost like the duration of that age, like 8 to like 11. I had short hair with varying stages of grown out perm.
Can we please have a photo?
Oh God, what do I? Yeah, I'm sure. Wait,
you can send it to us afterwards.
It
doesn't need to be
later.
live, but I must see.
It did one. I mean, your sense of humor developed really nicely. So yeah.
I mean, this is it. I was also an extreme runt, like the shortest in my class for all of elementary school, always super, super short. weighed like 10 pounds dripping wet, just like bone rack skinny, like a tiny child's body forever. And looked like a little boy, most of it. Oh man, I found a bunch of old pictures where I legitimately look like a boy that I hadn't seen like through family and friends anyway. It was just like truly a cold glass of water to the face. But yeah, I just looked like a tiny little runty boy. I had like a best friend who was a head taller than me, so that was a nice comedic difference. And like just like pretty rough and tumble. I wanted to like play a lot. I was a real late bloomer, so like I didn't get like boobs or my period until like high school / university. So it was like all of that stuff. Like that's also my interest in this, is that like some kids between 8 and 12 were really focused on like having crushes, and like they got boobs early and you get your period. Some kids got their period in grade 5. What a hellscape. But that wasn't my childhood. Oh, you poor thing. It was very much like
I was 10.
Oh, that's so unkind. God, that's cruel.
I'm just like, how can a 10-year-old, that's so much to organize at 10?
No.
Well, and this is a sidestep, but I don't know if you had this at your schools, but at our primary school, there was one toilet with a sanitary disposal thing, which was, of course, called the period toilet. And if you're, for any boys out there, you may or may not know that like the main source of gossip around that age is whether people do or do not have their periods. I don't know
100%.
why, but kids are completely obsessed with it. And firstly, it's really taboo to have it. And then it's really taboo to not have it. Basically, it's just the horror of growing up female. But if anyone caught you going into the period toilet, it's like, oh my God, Jasmine's got a period. So you had to like not only organize the admin of like pads and tampons at such a young age, but stealthily go into the period toilet when you didn't think anyone else was going to be around, because God forbid anyone would know that you were the red marked woman who had her fucking period.
And like not even woman, the red marked
child. Yes, it's so sad.
Oh God, that's horrible. I didn't get my period until I was 15.
Same. Totally same. My youngest sister got hers like 2 years before I got mine. I was like, and I loved it. I was like, this is fucking perfect. I never need to get that.
Yeah.
I feel like I had 5 years added to my sentence over here.
Yeah, you really did. I'm so sorry. That's a nightmare. Oh.
Sorry, Gillian, what were you going to say?
Who could know? I have no idea.
It doesn't matter.
All this period talk.
Yeah.
I'm just completely derailed by the fact that you had your period in grade 5. But I know you weren't the only one. I think I was more of the outlier. Yeah. Oh, I know. Just being like a runt human as a child. Yeah. So for me, that childhood, I really wanted my childhood to last as long as humanly possible, and was cognizant of that at a really young age. At that age, I'm like, I don't want to be a teenager. I had no desire to grow up. I was like, let's just stay in this. And I mean, I guess this writing for kids can be an extension of that. And, you know, I'm not ashamed of that. That seems great. It's like being childish, being childlike, playing games, having fun, like the way that you can be unself-conscious, the way you get to exist in the world as a kid. That's what we should all be striving for. Am I wrong? Like, I want to do enough adult things that I'm not being ignorant or hurting people or whatever, but I also like the behaviors that come with adulthood are bullshit. They suck. Yeah. They're stupid. And they're like a convention. They are an imported set of behaviors that is like, and not to go full like commie pinko here, but like that's a part of a capitalist superstructure in order to create workers in a school to work to death pipeline, and maybe prison in the middle if you didn't follow the rules. Like, who wants that? Not me.
100%. I love it. I'm on board 100%. And I think, you know, as you were talking about before in terms of, well, all of this chat, but designing characters and writing like fully formed, fully human characters with foibles and difficulties, and not just to exist for a morality tale. I think that's so incredibly important. And kids as well, I think often are treated as like loading adults. It's like, cool, like we'll come back to you once you're fully loaded, But the thing is,
Yes.
they still exist during that time. You're still a human being on the planet. Like, okay, your brain
100%.
hasn't finished developing and there are things that you still need help with and decisions that you should not make on your own. However, that's a lot of years of existing on the planet to say, we're not that interested in you yet because you're not finished.
Yeah.
And I think that's so
we can
unfair.
learn from kids. Like, that's like, I mean, I'm not a child haver and don't intend to, but I think that like I really enjoy children. It's not because I don't like them. That's kind of what they're here to teach us. Like, yes, adults have to like help them grow up to be functioning in the world and help them stay safe and alive and have like as minimal, mental damage as possible and physical safety. But it's like they're there so that Christmas is fun. They're there so that we remember that playing in the water is fun. They're there so that we remember that going to a splash pad and running around or playing tag or drawing pictures for 3 hours straight is a good time, so that we don't get so up in our own grills about like making money and like doing the thing day after day. Like that stuff's not actually important. It is, of course, required to survive. That has an importance, but like in the grand importance, who gives a shit?
I very much admire the way that you're able to hold that playfulness and that energy of kind of being young and curious and all of that within an adult life, right? Like it's almost as if you haven't allowed yourself to be forced into one of those. It's not a dichotomy that you accept. So like, how do you, or what tips would you have for people working in any kind of creative field where to maintain that essence of play, they need to build structures that will hold that without getting caught up in those structures? Like, how do you, I mean, I guess I'm asking you, like, how the fuck do you adult?
I think that, I mean, being in a creative field, period, is one of those things that you can do that helps with that. Because if you don't have access to that, like a certain amount of like creative force, you're not gonna like, what's the point of doing a creative job? Like you really have to get into like, people call it flow state or whatever, but like a creative playfulness in order to access your good ideas. That's where they come from. That's where they are. And so that is sort of a job requirement on a certain level. But I actually think that like, I don't know, having worked for 10 years in non-creative fields, my creativity was an asset everywhere. It was like being able to bring that energy into the room was always welcome. Always. People were always like, oh, you always have a good idea for something. Or like, what if I just run something by you? Like that just starts happening when you're bringing that more childlike awareness into your world, I think. And I mean, I'm like by no means a master of it, but I'm definitely somebody who tries with that if only to make it interesting for myself. I feel like I did that in jobs so I wouldn't lose my mind and be bored. It wasn't like, a grand quality. It was a survival instinct to not just melt down. Like this is the story I told before about, basically being offered a promotion made me quit. That happened more than once in my work history where they're like, oh, you want to be the assistant manager of this clothing retail outlet? And I was like, if I do that, I'm too much of a rule follower on a certain level. I'll just get locked in and I'm just going to be like, beep, 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 and just do this job for another 5 years. And at the end of that 5 years, I'm going to be like, that's my 5 years. I need them back. So I think a creative job, period, helps with that. But yeah, I don't think it's critical. I mean, I think it's nice. You need a bunch of good friends. Honestly, friends are kind of the answer. If you don't have people around you that also are like willing to play in that way and want to goof around and want to dress up and want to like have the kind of fun that you want to have, you got to look for some extra friends. You don't have to phase out the ones you currently have, but like start putting feelers out and bring the new people into the sphere until suddenly you're spending your time the way you want to spend it. And that I think is a critical piece. It was in Toronto, I had such a great crew and it was like a real heartbreaker to leave them. But like, I mean, I also still have them. I go back fairly regularly, but I had this one sort of like season. There was like a year in which I knew I was like, I just want to like have costume parties all the time. And it was like in that year I did. It was just like once a month, there was a reason for me to put on a crazy costume. And it was such a good year of just like, oh, someone's having a fruit and vegetable party. We're all dressing up as fruits and vegetables. Someone's having an angels and demons party. We're dressing up as angels and demons. It's Halloween. So then there's like, that's right there for you. And like, I also, when I was in Toronto, hosted like interactive theater screening things where everybody screams at the screen and we play like a shout along game, and that we'd always dress up for that, whatever movie we're doing. It's like, oh, we're doing Clueless, we're wearing Clueless outfits. We're doing The Craft, we're wearing The Craft outfits. So like, I don't know, I've always sort of, you got to make your own fun at the end of the day. Make your own fun and do it wherever you go.
I love that as a motto for life. And fuck, I miss dress up parties. I feel like they used to be everywhere all the time. More dress up parties.
Yes.
Hey, we're almost kind of coming to the end of our time, but you just reminded me of a huge chunk of your like career and life that we haven't touched on that I'd love to hear some more about, because I think it's such a fucking cool concept, which is drunk feminist films. Could you just tell us a little bit about what that project is, where it came from? Because I've watched it from the other side of the world thinking, what an amazing, fun idea and awesome merch.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll take credit for the merch for sure. It's drunk feminist films, it's a funny thing. I feel like it has, because it went on pause for the entirety of, 2020 to 2023 now. I think we had one last year, but like basically, all those lockdown quarantine times, not that they're not still happening, but like, the intensity of it meant that we couldn't do big group screenings. So if I had it to do again, I don't know if I'd have called it drunk feminist films, because the way that we view, or the way that I view like party drinking is a little different. But this is like, it started in, I feel like it's like close to its 10-year anniversary. So let's say it started in 2012, 2013. I made a drinking game to go with the movie Twilight, like a feminist themed drinking game, because Twilight's so funny and so bad and so dumb. And it's such a crime against writing and women and literature, but it's not a crime against fun because it's hilarious. But people were taking it so seriously at the time. And that scene when they play baseball and she does her little ballet leg and then throws the ball, it's so stupid and so funny. And it's the romanticization of a abusive relationship. That's an emotionally abusive relationship, and I'll die on that hill. But so I invited 3 pals over to watch the movie and do the drinking game. And we had a huge laugh, all got pretty wasted. And we're like, we should make this into a thing. And this is the sort of big city Toronto opportunity cost, where like these 4 women together ended up kind of having the entire skill set to make it into a thing, and the ambition to make it into a thing, and the contacts to make it into a thing. And like, it just became a thing. And like, between so-and-so's, like every little person was a part of it not dropping and just being a funny idea that happened one time. It's like Steph is super tenacious and Amy's super tenacious and ambitious too. And she's like, got all these contacts in media, and so does Steph. And like, I could do all the merch and make a logo, and like everybody's funny. So we're all in the room making each other laugh. And it just kind of kept going. And we started it kind of as a YouTube series, like when that was a thing that everybody was doing, just like sitting on couches and pointing bad cameras at each other, like proto podcasts. It was like the thing. And then we ended up sort of having different avenues where we're like, well, let's do this in a real theater. And anytime we did it, it just sold out. Like, people just came for it. The audience, we didn't have to hustle that hard, and we hustled hard. The first one, we're like, oh God, well, we're investing this, and we have to pay the theater this much, and they're going to take this cut of tickets. And if we don't earn this much on booze and blah, 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 like business questions. And so we like got on every like media promotion thing that we could. and it sold out in like a second. And then it just like every time we did it, it just sold out like crazy. And so we just kept moving to bigger and bigger theaters. Like that's the only way you can scale that stuff up. And it became such a fun thing, and our audiences were the best, and it still are. There's still an audience that's there for it, but like everything's changed so much. It's like before the pandemic, our main audience happened on Facebook. No one's there anymore. They're gone. So it's like, I still think that they're probably on Instagram and we could probably rally them, but like, I don't live in Toronto anymore. Amy doesn't live in Toronto anymore. Like everybody in that time has sort of got big girl jobs. And when we started it, all of us were just kind of like free floating freelancers trying to make things work. So we had all this loose time. We used to meet once a week, have a phone meeting once a week to talk about it. The amount of time spent that we threw in those early days, like it succeeded because we bled, sweated, and cried on it on a weekly basis. Nuts to me now. Not that I wouldn't put that kind of effort in, but we like got it running. So like truly pushing a wagon up a hill. It was Sisyphean. That's not it. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
That's it.
Yeah, something. But yeah, it's still a ton of fun, and we will do it again. It's 100% Toronto based. We've had a lot of people ask us like, can we do it in the city, or what if we did it for you? And like, because it's got the word feminist in it, it can be a bit of a lightning rod for people being like, oh yeah, you think you're feminist? Well, you didn't do this, and this. And like, it's in one way, that's a great thing because it forced us to be super conscientious, to be as truly inclusive as possible. And if people ask companies like, why aren't they inclusive about things? The reason is it takes a huge amount of time and a huge amount of work, and it costs money. And I think that's worth it. We as a company absolutely agreed it was 100% worth it. But this is why people aren't doing it, is because it's like, it's super expensive to do that stuff. And it takes a huge amount of time, and you have to want to, and you have to care. And we did care to do it, and we were happy to do it. But as a result of that, it's like, we can't let other people do this, because if they do something that's crappy, it's like, it would just burn the brand to the ground, you know? So it's something that we really care about. And it sucks that it's just like localized and small in Toronto, but it's also like, it makes it special. If you were there for that moment, you got to have that moment, and that's it. Everything doesn't have to scale.
That's so true. And it's such a brilliant idea. And I think it's really useful to hear the work that goes into these things, that it like, yeah, like you look at that on paper and you're like, what a fucking like fun, silly, like, you know, like lighthearted, almost like a fun thing to do that's just for fun, which it is. But also like, these things do not happen. Venues don't get booked, audiences don't get tickets, drinks don't get sold. Next month doesn't sell again if you don't work really hard. And I think that work, and it's really useful to hear you say, you know, we had a weekly phone call about it in order to, you know, hit the diversity targets and things that we wanted to. That takes work. Like, I think it's really important for people to hear that side of things, that can feel like a, you know, frivolous group of artists doing something for fun, but those things will never ever succeed without like good structure and hard work.
Oh, 100%. I don't know that we paid ourselves for like the first 5 years, like a pittance. Like we would maybe give ourselves like $150 of payment per show, shows that took us like 2 or 3 months of like hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of meetings and work and merch design and merch printing, and then hauling, loading stuff in, loading stuff out, coming up with the drinking game rules, designing cocktails, communicating with the venue, hiring comedians to do the stuff, prepping them. Like all of that stuff was just like, it was a huge thing. It took ages. And we used to do them in 2 different venues, where we'd like drive out to, where? Kitchener-Waterloo, which is like a city outside of Toronto. We used to drive and do it. Why? We quit that. I mean, their audiences were lovely and they were eager, but like, we paid the price.
Yeah.
No more. But yeah, it was I mean, it's still a company that we have and own. So it's something that I think we do all, when nobody's ready to let it die. So I would like to think that it'll happen again, but it is a lot more coordination now, because it's like I need to physically be in a different province, and everybody's got these full-time jobs we didn't have. This is also like sort of the benefit of that creative life when you're in the early stages of kind of becoming who you are creatively, and like trying a lot of different things and gigging here, and like got a contract here, got a contract there. That's a really good time to like run with any ideas that you've got. That's like when I started working on comic stuff. That's when Drunk Feminist Films became a thing, because I had a bunch of loose time. And it sort of feels like you're wasting your time when you're not doing the money-making stuff, but like that's actually the most fertile creative stuff. And like it can make you money down the road. You do need to survive, obviously, but like if you can take that loose time, like I had a whole web comic then. Without that, I wouldn't have like cut my teeth enough to have the confidence to like make these books. And now I have books. That's crazy.
It's great. It's so cool. And they're just so beautiful and funny and tender and smart. And what are you working on at the moment? Is there another Shirley and Jamila in the pipeline? Like what is day-to-day looking like for you?
Yeah, I'm actually working on the third book right now. And I've got like deadlines. I think I've signed stuff. I don't think I've got my first advance payment yet, but it's happening. It's on. Yeah.
Ooh.
So
so exciting, Gillian. Thank you so much. Not only are you so pretty, but you are so wise.
Thank
Look
you.
at her go. Thank you so much.
A whole feminist conversation and then immediately objectify Gillian.
Yeah. I was teed up and it fell through, but right after this, I was scheduled to go see the Barbie movie. Speaking of,
I haven't seen it yet. I'm so excited.
I know
so
we couldn't
excited.
get tickets because Tuesday is a big day, but we're going to go on Friday, and I'm going to dress up.
We went last night, and it was every bit as fun as you'd hope.
Okay, awesome. I'm excited.
Oh
I'm excited. Also, it's worth mentioning that both of you are like name checked in the thank yous of this book. So I want to put it on the podcast that both of these women directly supported me making Shirley and Jamila's Big Fall, which I wrote in part in Melbourne and Roy Space, etc., and just generally in the Melbourne area. So yeah, it's
so meaningful
international book.
Yay!
It's so meaningful. It's so cool.
You guys are the best.
Is. You're the best. Stop
You're the best. We both are the best.
I really have just very deep respect for you and your work and just the human that you show up as.
You
100% agree. Gillian, thank you so much for
someone
sharing.
Find a way to eloquently wrap it.
I'm doing it. I'm putting a bow on it. Love you both so much. Gillian, you're an absolute genius in many, many different ways. Where can people find you and all of the fabulous things that you do?
Oh, thank you for that compliment. And I will answer your question. I have a website. People don't even check portfolio websites anymore, but I'm on GillianG.com. Gillian is also spelled with a G. Gillian and then another letter G.com is where I'm at. I'm on Instagram and TikTok at GillianG and then spell out the words.com, like GILLIANG.DOTCOM. I'm technically still on the leaning tower of HTML code that is Twitter, but I think I gotta jump ship there. That whole X thing, Elon Musk's a nightmare. So I don't know. If you want to find me there, you can, but I don't know how long I'll last. Instagram, TikTok, whatever.
Beautiful. We will put links to all of that stuff and also where you can get Gillian's beautiful books in the show notes of this episode. Thank you so much, beautiful Gillian, beautiful Alice. We did it 3 time zones. Fuck yeah. Look at us go.
Winners.
It only took 6 months of emailing back and forth, you guys.
Who even remembers? What's time? Time's a meaningless, rippling.
We were so young back then. Thank you both so much. And thank you everyone who's listened as well. It was so fun.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Imposter Syndrome Club. Please follow us wherever you find your podcasts. And if you're feeling extra kind, rate and review. Or if you got any insights or value from this, share with a friend.
You can also find us on Instagram at imposterpod or online at impostersyndromeclub.com.